You're about to tap into the fan's perspective, where all things entertainment are talked about by the fans who love them the most. Now let's dive in with your host, Chris Laporto. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Fan's Perspective, courtesy of StarsandCelebs.com, where you can get all of your entertainment news, check out some great celebrity interviews, play some fun quizzes, and there's some other podcasts available for you to listen to, all courtesy of StarsandCelebs.com. Also, don't forget to visit ChudHorror.com and get your horror movie fix. Everything about horror movies, horror news, the supernatural. If you're into that stuff, make sure you head over to ChudHorror.com. My name is Chris Laporto. I am coming to you one more time here on The Fan's Perspective. Going to be doing things a little different this week. Flying solo here. Unfortunately, I don't have anybody to join me, so hopefully you can just handle it being me by myself. I want to thank you for tuning in. And what am I going to be talking about this week? Well, I'm going to be talking about probably my favorite movie of all time, Ghostbusters. The original Ghostbusters from 1984, celebrating its 35th anniversary this year, actually this month. It was earlier this month. And ironically, at the same time, Ghostbusters 2 is also celebrating its 30th anniversary, being released in June of 1989. So both movies, both celebrating milestone anniversaries, and I'm going to be talking about both of them. Also going to get into the reboot, and we'll talk about the future of Ghostbusters, the much anticipated Ghostbusters 3 that comes out next year. But yeah, like I said, no guests this week, so I don't have any questions for my guests. But I'm going to direct my questions towards you, the listeners. So I want to know what your favorite, or who your favorite Ghostbuster character is. Okay, I'll tell you mine. It's easily Peter Venkman, Bill Murray. I just laugh hysterically whenever I watch Peter Venkman, so he's my favorite. But I want to know who your favorite is, and you can let me know at the Fans Perspective homepage at starsandcelebs.com. You can also leave your comments on SoundCloud where you're listening to this. And don't forget to follow Fans Perspective Pod at Instagram, and you can leave your comments there as well. All right, so let's just dive right into it because, like I said, I'm doing this one all by my lonesome. So let's get into it. Let's get into Ghostbusters. Like I said, again, my favorite movie of all time. And, when people ask me what my favorite movie is, it's always hard for me to narrow it down to one movie because there's so many that I like. I'm a huge movie buff, obviously. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this. And I have a vast collection of movies. And, my answer could change really at any given time. Like sometimes I say it's Braveheart. Sometimes I might say it's The Lost Boys. I might even say sometimes that it's The Crow. And those are definitely all up there on my list. But there is one that I always am more inclined to pick over everything else, and that's Ghostbusters. I don't remember the first time that I saw it, but I can tell you that I've seen it probably a million times, and it never ever gets old to me. It came out a year before I was born, June 8th, 1984, so 35 years ago. I'm 34, almost 34, and I cannot ever get enough of Ghostbusters. I mean, when I was a kid, I had the Proton Pack, I had the trap that came with it, I had the Ecto-1 car, I had everything Ghostbusters. I was just in love with it. And still am. It still holds just a very special place in my heart because I grew up with it. And Ghostbusters is probably one of the reasons why I wanted to do what I'm doing now and just talk about movies and how people get to connect with them and what they mean to people. So it came out June 8th, 1984 on a $30 million budget. It made $295 million, so definitely a huge success. Rotten Tomatoes currently holds it at a 97% from the critics and 88% audience score. So critics like it a little more than the audience does, and I'd like to know why that is. You know, I'm not one to really put a lot of stock in critic reviews. I tend to care more about what fans think. I mean, listen, it's the fans' perspective, right? That's why it's called the fans' perspective, because if it was for the fans, there wouldn't be any of this stuff. So, in my opinion, the most important opinion comes from the fans. But only 88% for Ghostbusters. I'd like to know why. Do people feel like it's... I mean, it's still a pretty high score, but critics like this one more, which was a little bit surprising to me. Of course, the movie stars Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Sigourney Weaver, Harold Ramis, Rick Moranis, Ernie Hudson, Annie Potts, big time all-star cast right there. Dan Aykroyd actually wrote the script. It was directed by Ivan Reitman. And why did Dan Aykroyd want to do a movie about ghosts and ghost busting? Well, he himself is apparently a huge fan of the supernatural, and he got his ideas from his family. His father was big into the supernatural. His grandfather, his mother, his entire family are fans of the paranormal. His father, I think, wrote a book about ghosts. His mother claims to have seen ghosts. And his grandfather, from what I read, also tried to even communicate with ghosts. And I remember Dan Aykroyd had a show about the paranormal. Don't remember what it was called. I think it was short-lived. But it seems like Dan Aykroyd has a really strange... I'm sorry, not strange, because I don't think it's strange. A strong obsession with the paranormal, supernatural, and ghosts. So I'm glad he did, because we got Ghostbusters out of it. It was originally written by him for himself, along with Eddie Murphy and the late John Belushi, all at the time when Saturday Night Live was booming in the 70s and the 80s. Unfortunately, John Belushi passed away. Eddie Murphy turned down the role, and there was a whole rewrite, which Ivan Reitman was involved in rewriting the script, because the original story was supposed to be Aykroyd and Belushi and Murphy all part of a ghost-busting team that was rival to other teams. It was going to take place in the future. It was going to be a whole bunch of these different teams of Ghostbusters kind of not competing with each other, but just rivals. And Ivan Reitman is the one that convinced Dan Aykroyd to make it modern times. Have it to where Ghostbusters are just starting. These three scientists are, you get the idea to create a team and hunt ghosts. And it comes from Bill Murray's character, who looks at it as kind of like a cash cow. And that's how Ghostbusters comes to be. And because John Belushi turned it down, and Eddie Murphy turned it down, John Belushi passed away, that's when they recruited the likes of Bill Murray and Harold Ramis, Rick Moranis, everybody I just said. Ernie Hudson, I actually met Ernie Hudson. I live in the New York area, and there's a Monster Mania, it's called, a horror movie convention in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, that I've been to a few times. Really, really cool horror movie convention. If you're in the tri-state area and you've never been to it, definitely check it out, because they got a lot of great guests, a lot of great actors that go there. I met Robert Englund there. I met Matthew Lillard there. I met Heather Langenkamp, Dee Wallace, Kane Hodder, and I met Ernie Hudson. It's just a really cool place. And I'll tell you a funny story about my meeting with Ernie Hudson. So, and I'm pretty sure I'll get made fun of for this, but it is what it is. When I was standing online waiting to meet Ernie Hudson, and I'm standing there with my little brother, and I had gone there with my brother, my girlfriend, and my girlfriend's sister. And I'm standing online waiting to meet, not Ernie Hudson, but I'm waiting to meet Winston Zeddemore. And I'm looking at him, and he's got his Ghostbusters shirt on, and I start to get emotional. And I'm starting to become aware of the fact that I am getting emotional. And when I was finally able to get up and actually meet him, shook his hand, and he could tell that I was emotional. I was tearing up a little bit. Probably thought I was a weirdo. And I just, I apologize for being emotional, but I told him, I grew up with Ghostbusters and it means a lot to me to meet you. He was really cool about it, really nice. Uh, yeah, so that's my story of meeting Ernie Hudson, or like I said, I met Winston Zedmore. So anyway, moving on from that. So Ghostbusters, what makes Ghostbusters great? I mean, it's just fun. I really don't know how else to describe it. It's fun. It's witty. It's got the perfect kind of comedy that I like, which is all, Bill Murray's kind of dry, sarcastic sense of humor. Rick Moranis is great. I mean, his character is hysterical in it. Everybody is great. Even Annie Potts has some great moments. When she answers the phone, what do you want? Ghostbusters, what do you want? I mean, it just makes me laugh. But it's just a fun movie. And I don't know. I guess that, what else can you say about it? It's just a super super fun movie that to me is not outdated. It just continues to entertain me every time I watch it. The whole ghost aspect is great about it, and for a movie that came out in 1984, I think the special effects were pretty decent. You look at today's special effects, and a lot of people criticize it because CGI can either be really good or it can be really bad. And I think it tends to lean towards CGI being more bad than it is good. I definitely like practical effects. And I don't know what kind of computer effects were used in 1984, but it's definitely, to me, all the special effects and the makeup, it definitely holds up. I love the way Zool looks, and I love the way Gozer looks, and I love what they did. However they did it, I don't know. With, of course, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man at the end. Just a great movie, and it's not. The first one is not too comedic, and it's not too campy, and it also has a sense of, I don't want to say horror or thriller, but it kind of takes. There is moments where you feel like the content is serious, like, you know, they're dealing with this supernatural force that can really do some damage. And yeah, man, I mean, what else can I say about Ghostbusters? Here it was 35 years later. It's crazy. Favorite moments of the first Ghostbusters movie. I love Bill Murray as Peter Venkman. His whole interaction with Sigourney Weaver after she's possessed by Zool. And when he goes to pick her up for their date, and he goes into her apartment, and the apartment just looks trashed. And there's like this weird kind of like drool dripping from everywhere, and she is just kind of like coming on to him this very sexual manner, and he's throwing these one-liners and cracking these jokes like he's not affected by it, but you can tell he's uncomfortable, and it's just the best part of the movie to me. I love that whole scene. Also like the scene where the other kind of demon dog is chasing Rick Moranis through Central Park. I think that's hysterical. But yeah, let me know what your favorite moments are from Ghostbusters. We can't go without talking about the soundtrack for Ghostbusters, right? Of course, the Ghostbusters theme song is probably one of the most famous movies theme songs of all time. I hear it a lot, get played on the radio around Halloween time, which is my favorite time of the year. If you know anything about the Ghostbusters theme song that was performed, written by Ray Parker Jr., you know that they were actually sued for that song by Huey Lewis and the News. Huey Lewis and the News were approached to do a song for Ghostbusters, and they turned it down. And from what I did my research on, they turned it down because they were doing a song for Back to the Future. And I guess they didn't want to be a band that was doing multiple songs for movie soundtracks. And according to them, the reason why they sued was because it sounds too much like their song, I Want a New Drug. Now, whenever I hear that song, I don't know if I see it. I feel like sometimes I hear it and sometimes I don't. But I can tell you this. I think that the Ghostbusters theme song is probably more iconic and more recognized than I Want a New Drug by Huey Lewis and the News, with all due respect to them, of course. So fast forward 5 years later, I mean, Ghostbusters is a huge hit for Paramount and, of course, everybody involved. So then Ghostbusters 2, it's time to do a sequel. And that gets released on June 16th, 1989, on a $37 million budget. So they upped the budget a little bit for this one. And it made a little bit less. It made $215 million. But this one is not as well received. 53% critic score currently on Rotten Tomatoes, and a 61% audience score. So in this time, the fans like it a little bit more than the critics do, but it's a pretty significant drop from both critic and audience reviews. But you know what? I don't see why. To me, this one is just as fun as Ghostbusters. I can't watch the first Ghostbusters without watching part 2 right after it. I just have to. Even if I'm like, if I have nothing to do and I'm sitting around and I'm like, you know what, I feel like watching Ghostbusters, and I put it on, even if I don't intend to watch both movies, I wind up doing it anyway, because I just can't watch one without the other. It was released, Ghostbusters 2, on, did I say June 16th, 1989. So actually, this past week, only a few days ago as I'm recording this, celebrated its 35th anniversary, 35 years of Ghostbusters 2. And the interesting thing about Ghostbusters 2 was that it actually wasn't wanted. The cast did not really want to do a sequel. They were uncomfortable with it because they felt that part 1 was conclusive and that it was, the end of the story, and they, Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, Ivan Reitman were all looking to do other things with each other. Eventually they agreed to do it because of the success not only of the first movie but also the animated series, The Real Ghostbusters. For those of you who remember that cartoon, really popular cartoon. And yeah, they eventually decided to do it. But I find it interesting that they didn't want to, and I'll get back to why I think that's interesting in a second as I talk about the future of Ghostbusters. But the entire cast returns, which I think is awesome. Bill Murray, Sigourney Weaver, Rick Moranis, Ernie Hudson, Annie Potts, they all come back. And that's awesome when you see that. If you're going to make a sequel to a beloved movie, you need to have the same people come back. It's just not the same when they don't. And I think that's why a lot of times sequels fail. It's not every movie franchise has all of their people come back. Yeah, and for whatever reason, actors say, some actors at least don't do sequels, they wind up doing them anyway. And people say that sequels fail because the story's just not as good and they can't capture or recapture the magic with the first movie. But if you don't have the original cast come back, it's just not the same. And I'll expand on that as well a little bit later on when I talk to you about the reboot. But yeah, Ghostbusters 2, you know what really sticks out to me about Ghostbusters 2 is the soundtrack. I really like the soundtrack. Bobby Brown did it. He did all the music. And I'll tell you, man, this is a soundtrack that I don't mind listening to when I'm in my car or something. I mean, every song is just fun. Fun to listen to. Bobby Brown's also in the movie. Has a little bit of a part there towards the end. But this movie has a different feel about it. It's definitely more lighthearted. It's more comedic. A little more campy. My favorite character is not any of the actual Ghostbusters. It's Peter MacNicol, who plays Johann, yes. He is freaking hysterical in this movie. I love his character. And Peter MacNicol he hasn't been somebody that has become mainstream. He's had a long career, but he can play some great comedic parts, and to me, this is probably the best piece of work that he's ever did. He was also in Sophie's Choice, which was, that's a movie that is, regardless, I think AFI has it on like their 100 best movies of all time or something like that. Peter McNichol also had success in the show Numbers, and he was also pretty damn hysterical in Dracula Dead and Loving It, which came out in 1995. But he was hysterical in Ghostbusters 2. I loved his character. Also, the villain this time is Vigo. Vigo, who lives in a painting, kind of a haunted painting, voiced by Max von Sydow, which I never knew really up until recently. Max von Sydow, of course, has been acting forever, and he was probably most famously known for being Father Merrin in The Exorcist. But here he's doing the voice of Vigo. But this movie, Ghostbusters 2, is definitely more lighthearted. The whole thing with the slime, I think, is really cool. I love that the slime gets its energy or its negative power from all the negativity in New York City from the citizens. And, living in New York my whole life, I can understand why that would happen. Like I said, I love Ghostbusters 2 just as much as I love the first one. I can't watch the first without watching the second. Love to know what you think. Favorite moments from part 2? I guess that's kind of hard for me to pick one favorite moment from part 2. Probably any time Peter McNichol is on screen, I think is just hysterical. Annie Potts, her character was changed a little bit for this movie, and it was meant to mirror, because she plays Janine, and Janine was presented differently in the cartoon. So I think because of the success of that, her character was changed to mirror the character from the cartoon. So there was some changes. And how can I forget about Slimer? Can't forget about Slimer. We saw Slimer in part 1. Here in part 2, he's more of a comedic presence. Has some funny moments with Rick Moranis in the movie. But Slimer is, I think, just as big of a character to Ghostbusters than any of the other main characters. Alright, so we're going to take just a little bit of a break here. And I hope you've been hanging with me, my solo attempt here. First time going solo on the fans' perspective. We're going to do a little bit of a quiz break. And I am going to ask you if you can name all of the members of the Ghostbusters. Give me all of their character names, first and last. I know you can do it. It's kind of pretty easy, honestly. And of course, you can answer that question at the Fans Perspective homepage at starsandcelebs.com. You can also put it in the comment section on SoundCloud. And you can also answer it at Fans Perspective Pod on Instagram. And while you are doing that, I'll be back in a sec. All right, so now let's move on to something that I almost hate to say it. It was controversial when it was released. And here's what I want to say before I kind of start talking about the reboot of Ghostbusters. Fans Perspective is not a political show, okay? And in this current time that we live in, politics have seemed to kind of seep into our every form of life. It's gone beyond how we live, how we handle our personal lives as far as work and taking care of ourselves and things like taxes and how the country is run. It's seeped into our entertainment, and it's hard to escape it. The only thing that I will say politically about myself is that I'm not a political person. I treat people based on how they treat me. I treat people like human beings. And I don't care what walk of life you come from. As long as you are not hateful and treating people disrespectfully, it's important to be nice. That's my stand. Now, why am I saying that? Well, because we're going to talk about the Ghostbusters reboot, Ghostbusters Answer the Call, as it's become known as now, which came out in 2016. It had a $144 million budget, which is insane. That is more than both original movies combined. And I know you're talking about the 80s as compared to 2016, but that is a big budget, and it made $229 million. So it made its money back. You can consider it a success. As far as making its money back, it was a success. You can't really deny that. It wasn't well received at all. And as I look at the Rotten Tomatoes score here, let's take a look. Let's start with the critic score. 74% on Rotten Tomatoes. Audience score is 50. Now, I agree with that. I'll tell you why it is that Ghostbusters Answer the Call did not sit well with fans, okay? But first, let's get into who's in it. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Kristen Wiig, Kate McKinnon, Leslie Jones, and Chris Hemsworth. It was directed by Paul Feig. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Paul Feig. I apologize if I'm not. And the feeling from a lot of people who support the 2016 reboot, the feeling for them on why it wasn't well received is because it featured an all-women cast. And like I said, politics is seeped into everything, and one of the issues politically and socially today is the idea of being inclusive, and anybody can be anything, and that means that we have been seeing this kind of wave of female empowerment, which I'm not against at all. I'm totally not. But here, from my perspective, here's why to me Ghostbusters 2016 did not work. We have been waiting since 1989 for Ghostbusters 3. Okay? Along the way, we have seemingly come close, and then, one step forward, two steps back kind of thing, with that becoming a reality. The fans who like Ghostbusters don't just like it. I mean, we love it. Why do we love it? We love it because the people that were in it originally. Whenever you like something from its original form, it's hard to see it in any other way. Here we are, 2016, and it's announced that Ghostbusters is coming back. And then it's announced that it's going to be, an all-female cast. It's a letdown because we want Bill Murray back. We want Dan Aykroyd. We want Ernie Hudson. Howard Ramis, unfortunately, passed away in 2014. And that put kind of a kibosh on any type of movie with the original cast coming back. But, we'll get back to that in a sec. So when this idea came forth of having it be Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Wiig, and it's called Ghostbusters, it didn't feel like Ghostbusters. It didn't feel like it was a continuation of what so many of us fell in love with as children. And I can say from my point of view that it's not about the fact that now it's all female-led, and it's not about shoving something down our throats. It's just about, we had a certain expectation that wasn't met. And whether or not people understand that, I don't know if I can explain it any better, but that's just the reality of it. Besides that, the movie just wasn't good. It wasn't. I didn't think it was funny, and I think maybe I laughed watching it a couple of times, but I just wasn't into it at all. And I gave it a chance. I sat there and I watched it, and it just didn't do it for me. And it's not because of who was in it. It's just because of how it was executed, and it wasn't a good movie. It wasn't funny. Yeah, like I said, from my perspective, that's what it is. I just couldn't get past. Not that I couldn't get past the female cast, but it just didn't feel like Ghostbusters to me. And the movie wasn't good. And I know Leslie Jones made some comments when Ghostbusters 3 was announced that, she felt like her and everybody else involved in the 2016 reboot were disrespected. And there's probably a lot of people that did not like the movie for the sole reason that they felt like it was something that was being forced on them. That's probably true. For me, though, I can say for me, because I can really only speak for me, that's not why I didn't like it. But Ghostbusters, for me, needed to be, if it was going to come back, it needed to be the original cast. What my first episode of this podcast was all about remakes and reboots and whether or not fans want them, how they received, are they necessary? My answer is no. And I just saw, this weekend, the new Child's Play, and it's as I was watching it, I was just like, man, like, why? Just why? Why? Because I'm not going to go into a whole Child's Play review right now. I will in very shortly. You'll be able to find a article on Stars and Celebs and chudhorror.com on that. But it's not the same when you take the title of a classic franchise and change everything up with it. I just don't think it's necessary. I think that's what it is. And to further kind of make my point on it not being about a female cast, everybody remembers the big Sony email leak that happened. One of the things that came out of that people found out was that there were plans to make a new Ghostbusters movie with Channing Tatum and Chris Pratt. Off the top of my head, I don't remember if there was anybody else that was involved in that. But when I heard about that, I had the same reaction. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see Ghostbusters starring Channing Tatum and Chris Pratt. With all due respect to them. Okay, I like Chris Pratt. Chris Pratt is awesome. Channing Tatum, he's okay. But with all due respect to those guys, I did not want to see a Ghostbusters movie with them. I want to see Ghostbusters with Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and Rick Moranis and Ernie Hudson and Sigourney Weaver, and I want to see it with Harold Ramis, but unfortunately, that's not going to happen because, as I said before, he passed away. That's why Ghostbusters Answer the Call was not well received. Okay, it made a lot of money, and I'm sure there are people out there that like it, and if you do, that's fine. But overall, the movie was a bust. Not financially, but just whether or not people actually liked it. It was a bust because it just wasn't good, and it wasn't the original cast that we've been waiting for so long for the original cast to come back. And speaking of all of that, we do get now a Ghostbusters 3 that comes out in 2020, next summer. And apparently, we are getting Dan Aykroyd back. Apparently, we're getting Bill Murray back. I'm sure Ernie Hudson would do it. I hope Rick Moranis will have some type of role in it. Not to repeat myself again, but unfortunately we know that Harold Ramis won't appear in it. It will be directed by Jason Reitman, Ivan Reitman's son, and it just looks like we are finally getting what we wanted. And if you've seen that teaser trailer, when that classic kind of scary theme comes up, and you know which one I'm talking about, and You look at the looks like a barn or a garage, and the tarp flaps up, and you see the back of the Ecto-1, and I lost my shit. It's like, yes, Ghostbusters 3, finally. Now, this has been such a long time coming, and the funny thing is that in 1999, we almost came close to a Ghostbusters 3, because apparently Dan Aykroyd has been pitching one ever since part 2, which brings me back to what I was saying before. Ghostbusters 2 wasn't wanted by the cast, but then here's Dan Aykroyd for all these years trying to create a part 3. Now, part 3 originally, and everything is pretty much kept under wraps right now about what Ghostbusters 2020 will be about, what the plot is. Nobody really knows. But the concept for what would have been Ghostbusters 3, which there was a script written by Dan Aykroyd in 1999, it was called Ghostbusters 3 Hellbent, and it would have seen them go to hell. Bill Murray said that he did not want to appear in a Ghostbusters third Ghostbusters film, and they actually considered replacing him with Ben Stiller. So there was some real movement here, some real traction to get a part 3. And Ivan Reitman abandoned the project after Harold Ramis passed away, which was in 2014. And then that's when the whole reboot came with Paul Feig and everybody involved in that. But we're finally getting it, guys. Ghostbusters 3 will be coming out in 2020. It is set in the original universe, and I cannot wait to see more about what that is going to be. What is the plot going to be? Will the original cast be the stars, or will they be kind of passing the torch? I think Finn Wolfhard has been cast in it. We all know him from Stranger Things and from It. I just cannot wait for more news to come out about Ghostbusters 3. Yeah, man. Let me know what you think. Let me know how you feel about the Ghostbusters Answer the Call reboot. What were your thoughts on it? And tell me how excited you are, because I know you got to be, about a Ghostbusters 3. And I'm going to take another just quick little breather, and I'll be back in a second. All right, so as I'm about to wrap things up here, let's just quickly talk about the legacy that Ghostbusters has. When you talk about pop culture, Ghostbusters is a staple of that, and always has been since it came out in 1984. And it expanded, obviously got the sequel, but it expanded with cartoons, like I mentioned, also into, toys, and I talked about how I had the full proton pack, and I had the trap. Man, I wish I still had those things. I had the Ecto-1. We've had some video games. Did you play that Ghostbusters video game that came out? It's got to be, 10 years ago now. I got that game the first day it came out for the Xbox 360, and I loved it, man. I had a lot of fun. And there was even some talks that game was kind of like a spiritual part 3. And that game is a lot of fun. That game is actually being remastered and re-released this year for both the PS4 and the Xbox One. And I know I will be trying to get my hands on a copy of that, because I definitely want to replay it. Ghostbusters will go down, in my opinion, as one of the most beloved franchises coming out of the 80s. There's so many great movies coming out of the 80s that have stood the test of time, that still mean just as much today as they did then, and Ghostbusters is at the forefront of that. Every year you go to Comic-Con, you go to any type of convention, you're going to see somebody dressed up as a Ghostbuster. Halloween, you're going to see somebody dressed up as a Ghostbuster. And, I mean, look, we got the Ghostbusters reboot, and now we are getting Ghostbusters 3. Why? Well, it's because the fans want them. Which is kind of the catch-22, if you will, about reboots and remakes. I mean, they happen because we want them. Let's be honest. They do happen because we want them. Whether or not they're good is debatable. And like I said, I talked about, do fans really want them, and are they necessary? Sometimes they're not, but if you're going to do it, this is the way you do it. You do it with the original people. The legacy of Ghostbusters, I think, will continue to live on until the end of time. I really, truly believe that. I know I've seen it a million times. I'm going to see it a million more times. And I will be the first person to get my movie tickets summer of next year. And I'm looking forward to seeing what else gets released about that, and what it's going to look like. But I want to thank you for joining me this week on The Fan's Perspective. Let me know what you thought of this episode. Thank you so much for hanging out with me as I flew solo on this one. I hope you stuck it out with me. Don't forget to visit starsandcelebs.com, visit chudhard.com. Make sure you are telling your friends about The Fan's Perspective. And don't forget that now we have The Fan's Perspective on Instagram at Fans Perspective Pod. Share all of your thoughts and comments with me there. Let me know what movie that is celebrating an anniversary this year would you like me to talk about, and I will talk about it, and hopefully next time I'll have some people to bounce some commentary back and forth with. But until then, thank you again, and I will see you next time here on The Fan's Perspective.